A doorman hears a crash and sees a man plunge from a 10th-story hotel window. In a prison cell, a hardened criminal screams in terror at hallucinations of blood seeping from the walls. And in a quiet Canadian hospital, a young mother forgets her own name, her mind wiped clean. These may sound like unrelated nightmares, but they all have one thing in common. They were victims of the same secret program. This is Black Box Investigation. Before I begin, subscribe, and don't miss what's next. My name is Walter Graves. I'm an investigative journalist, and for the past few months, I've been digging into one of the most disturbing programs ever run by the CIA, a program called MK-Ultra. It started with curiosity, but the deeper I went, through old case files, government transcripts, and conversations with families, the more real it became. This isn't just a story about secrecy. It's about people. Ordinary people who were used, lied to, and in some cases broken, all in the name of science and national security. Inside the CIA's quest for mind control, MK-Ultra began in the early 1950s, at the height of the Cold War. America was gripped by fear that communist enemies had unlocked the secrets of brainwashing. Soldiers returning from Korean prisoner camps were confessing to war crimes under duress. Some even refused to come home, apparently converted by enemy brain perversion techniques. The CIA feared the Soviets and Chinese might be ahead in a new kind of warfare, a war for control of the human mind. So in 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles approved Project MK-Ultra, a top-secret program to develop mind control methods. The mission was as startling as it sounds: find ways to make people do things against their will, erase memories, plant new identities, essentially, to control human behavior through any means necessary. The CIA's scientists and contractors tested everything: powerful drugs like LSD and mescaline, hypnotism, electroshock therapy, sensory deprivation, and worse. No method was too extreme, because they truly believed national survival might depend on it. This clandestine program spread its tentacles across North America. It wasn't just a few experiments in a lab. MK-Ultra eventually comprised 149 sub-projects, contracting out to at least 80 institutions: universities, hospitals, prisons, even pharmaceutical companies. Most of the time, the human subjects had no idea what was happening to them. Some volunteered for research without knowing the true purpose. Others were coerced with offers of therapy or lighter prison sentences, and many were simply experimented on without any consent at all. The CIA often targeted society's most vulnerable: prisoners, mental patients, sex workers, people who wouldn't be missed or who couldn't easily fight back. To maintain secrecy, CIA officials shredded and burned most MK-Ultra records in 1973, when the program finally shut down. That cover-up was nearly total, but not quite. A cache of financial documents survived by accident, and later congressional investigations pried open the black box a little. What we know today comes from those fragments, plus lawsuits and testimony from victims. It's far from the full story, but it's enough to confirm that real, living people were hurt, often permanently, by these experiments. In many cases, the victims themselves didn't learn what had been done to them until decades later. Some still don't know, even now. I want to introduce you to a few of these people and tell you what was done to them. These aren't just names in a file. They were fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters. And the things they went through sound like science fiction nightmares. As I dug into their stories, I often asked myself, how could this have happened in a free society? How could a government do this to its own citizens, and even to its own employees? The answers are tangled up in Cold War paranoia and secrecy. But let's start at the ground level, with a man lying broken on a New York City sidewalk in 1953. A scientist's deadly plunge. It was just before dawn on November 28, 1953, when Frank Olson, a 43-year-old scientist, fell to his death from room 1018A of the Statler Hotel in Manhattan. The hotel night manager heard the smash of glass and the thud on the pavement. "We got a jumper," a doorman shouted. Olson's body lay on the sidewalk, clad only in underwear and an undershirt, glass shards glinting around him. In the hotel room, police found Olson's colleague, a man named Robert Lashbrook, sitting on the toilet in shock. Lashbrook was oddly calm. He said Olson had been acting strangely and just ran straight through the closed window before he could stop him. The police wrote it up as an apparent suicide or accident, case closed. But for Frank Olson's family, and eventually for me as an investigator, that was just the beginning. Olson was not a random businessman or troubled tourist. He was a U.S. Army biochemist working at a top-secret military research center, Fort Detrick in Maryland, and he was closely involved with the CIA's experimental programs. In fact, Frank Olson was one of the CIA's own, part of the inner circle developing biological weapons and mind control techniques. What would drive a loyal Cold War scientist to leap out of a window? The truth remained buried for over 20 years. It wasn't until the 1970s that the Olson family learned the stunning secret. Frank Olson had been an unwitting guinea pig of MK-Ultra. Just a week before his death, he attended a small CIA research retreat. Without telling the participants, CIA chemist Sidney Gottlieb slipped LSD into Frank Olson's drink. It was an experiment to observe the drug's effects on unwitting subjects. After the dose, Olson had a bad trip. He became disoriented, agitated, and emotionally disturbed. In the following days, his behavior grew erratic. He told colleagues he had made a terrible mistake and hinted he might quit his job. To the CIA, this raised alarm bells. Olson knew many of the agency's darkest secrets. If he was mentally unstable or feeling guilty, would he talk? The official story is that Olson's death was a tragic suicide brought on by an LSD-induced psychological breakdown. But as I dug deeper, I found chilling indications that it may not have been a simple open and shut suicide. Years later, in the 1990s, Olson's body was exhumed and re-examined. The forensic pathologist found injuries, a blow to the head, that suggested Olson might have been knocked unconscious before he went out the window. Could it be that agents were sent to silence him, to stage his death as a suicide? Olson's sons believe so. While there's no smoking gun document to prove murder, the Olson case remains one of the most haunting MK-Ultra mysteries. Whether he jumped or was pushed, one fact is indisputable. The CIA secretly drugged one of its own scientists, and it directly led to his death. President Gerald Ford even invited the Olson family to the White House in 1975 to apologize, an unprecedented gesture, and the government paid the family a settlement for the wrongful death. As a journalist, I've spoken with Eric Olson, Frank's son. The pain and anger in his voice are still palpable. "They robbed us of our father," he told me, "and for decades we didn't know why." Frank Olson's story is often cited because it came to light so publicly, but he was by no means the only victim of MK-Ultra. Far from it. To truly grasp the scope, we need to look at the others, often far more anonymous, whose lives were upended by this covert research. Unwitting Patience, the tennis pro who never came home. In early 1953, around the same time Frank Olson was dosed, a 42-year-old man named Harold Blauer checked into the New York State Psychiatric Institute seeking help for depression. Blauer was not a spy or a criminal. He was a professional tennis player going through a rough patch after a divorce. He wanted therapy. What he got was something he never could have imagined. Without Blauer's knowledge, the hospital had a secret contract with the U.S. Army to test experimental mind-altering substances. In the name of science, doctors injected Blauer with increasing doses of a potent mescaline derivative. a hallucinogenic drug related to peyote. He had no idea the military was behind the treatment. He was told it was a new medication. On January 8, 1953, after a particularly massive injection, Harold Blauer died on the hospital bed. The official cause of death was covered up. Records were altered to suggest a weak heart or a bad reaction to a routine treatment. His family was devastated and bewildered. He was supposed to be released in a couple weeks, and now he was gone. For 22 years, the truth was kept from them. It wasn't until the 1970s investigations that Blauer's family learned what had happened. The revelation was appalling. Harold Blauer had been used as a human guinea pig in chemical warfare experiments. The drug that killed him was not meant to cure his depression at all. It was meant to test the effects of incapacitating agents for potential battlefield use. A judge later ruled that the government engaged in a 20-year conspiracy to conceal its role in Blauer's death. In 1987, a court finally awarded damages to Blauer's estate and acknowledged the cover-up. But no apology can truly make up for what was done. Blauer's life was treated as expendable. He was a normal American citizen who walked into a hospital seeking help and ended up dead because some faceless officials wanted to know how a new drug might scramble the human mind. Harold Blauer's story shook me because of how ordinary he was. He wasn't a spy or a soldier. He could have been any of us. And for every victim like Blauer, whose name eventually came out, there are countless others still hidden by CIA secrecy. The Washington Post once reported that with few exceptions, we still don't know who most of the MK-Ultra subjects were or what became of them. Think about that. The CIA experimented on people in the 1950s and 60s, and many of those people might have lived the rest of their lives never understanding why they felt different or why they struggled after a certain point in time. Operation Midnight Climax, The Unwitting Johns. Perhaps one of the most bizarre chapters of MK-Ultra took place in a collection of safe houses in New York and San Francisco. Picture this: a small apartment artfully decorated in lurid colors, a plush bedroom behind a two-way mirror. A man is led inside by an attractive woman, not knowing she's on the CIA's payroll. She pours him a drink. Hidden in that drink is a dose of LSD. In the next room, a CIA agent sits behind the mirror, sipping a martini, watching everything unfold and taking notes. This was Operation Midnight Climax, a sub-project of MK-Ultra. The CIA hired sex workers to lure unsuspecting clients to these safe house brothels. The aim was to dose the men with LSD and observe them in an intimate setting to see how the drug affected them, and also to see if during the vulnerability of a sexual encounter, they could extract information. The men who stumbled out of these brothels, confused, high as a kite, never knew it was the U.S. government that had secretly scrambled their brains for the night. They likely wrote it off as, "Someone must have slipped me something," or just a really bad hangover, if they remembered anything at all. As an investigator, reading the internal memos about Operation Midnight Climax was surreal. The agent in charge, George Hunter White, seemed to relish his assignment. He later wrote about it, saying, "I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun, fun, fun." Watching people through a mirror as they were unknowingly drugged and manipulated. Fun. He even mused, where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest? That quote sends a chill down my spine. The All-Highest he's referring to was the CIA leadership. The victims of Midnight Climax remain mostly unknown by name. They were just random citizens, many of them blue-collar workers or bar patrons who thought they were in for a one-night fling. What they got was an unasked-for trip into insanity. Some of these men experienced psychotic reactions. Imagine suddenly your perception of reality melting, and you have no idea why. You think you're losing your mind. Maybe some of those people struggled with flashbacks or anxiety for years after. We don't know. The CIA didn't bother to follow up with most of them. Once the night's experiment was over, the agency got what it wanted and moved on. To me, this is one of the most disturbing aspects of MK-Ultra, how casually they played with innocent people's sanity. It was all in the name of national security, of course, but no one had volunteered in those cases. Our government simply decided that the lives of a few citizens were collateral damage in a grand quest for mind control. The prison experiments, a gangster's nightmare. The CIA also found a ready pool of test subjects behind bars. Prisoners, after all, had virtually no power to refuse. In many cases, the agency would get doctors to offer inmates a deal. Participate in some experiments, and you'll get a lighter sentence or extra privileges. Sometimes even that pretense wasn't bothered with. They just experimented on captive populations in prisons because they could do so in secret. One prisoner's story stands out, not only because of who he became, but because he left a vivid account of what he endured. His name was James Whitey Bulger. Yes, the same man who would later become a notorious Boston mob boss. But in the mid-1950s, Bulger was just a young inmate serving time for armed robbery. He was in the federal prison in Atlanta when he volunteered for what he was told was a medical experiment aimed at finding a cure for schizophrenia. In reality, it was MK-Ultra in action. Bulger and a group of other inmates were given LSD every day for over a month, and the researchers observed their behavior. The inmates had no idea they were being fed psychedelic drugs, at least not at first. Bulger later wrote about the experience in his journals, and his recollections are harrowing. 8 convicts in a panic and paranoid state, he wrote, describing one of the test sessions. Total loss of appetite, hallucinating, the room would change shape, hours of paranoia and feeling violent. We experienced horrible periods of living nightmares and even blood coming out of the walls. Guys turning into skeletons in front of me. I saw a camera change into the head of a dog. I felt like I was going insane. This was not just one bad trip. It was weeks of being trapped in a cell while your mind was assaulted by potent drugs and you were watched like a lab rat. Bulger, a pretty tough character by any measure, was left permanently scarred by it. He wrote that he had never fully trusted anyone again after that experience, and it filled him with rage. Now you might not have much sympathy for criminals behind bars, but remember, volunteering for an experiment doesn't mean you sign up for torture. Bulger and the others were not told, "We're giving you LSD to see what endless hallucinations do to the human psyche." They were told it was something like an effort to find a cure for mental illness. They were deceived and subjected to psychological torture. Another inmate in a different prison was given LSD every day for 77 days straight. Imagine that. The human mind can barely withstand one acid trip, let alone 2.5 months of continuous distortion. It's no surprise that many prison test subjects were reported to have suffered serious mental breakdowns. Some may never have recovered. Even beyond drugs, the CIA sponsored experiments in prisons with other techniques. They tested hypnosis, isolation, and even attempt at psychic driving in at least one prison hospital. The thread through all this is chilling. People who were under the control of the state, whether as prisoners or patients, were seen as fair game. They had no advocates, no way to say no, and everything was hidden under layers of classified agreements. If you're still listening, you know what to do. Hit like and subscribe to support me in my investigation. Shattered minds in Montreal. So far, many of the victims I've described were unwitting and anonymous, but some of the most heart-wrenching stories come from a place that wasn't in the United States at all, even though the CIA's hand was certainly involved. For this chapter, I traveled to Montreal, Canada. There, in the late 1950s, a renowned psychiatrist named Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron turned his psychiatric ward into a veritable torture chamber, all under the guise of cutting-edge treatment and with funding from MK-Ultra. Cameron was the president of the World Psychiatric Association, a man at the top of his field, which makes what he did even more shocking. He believed he could reprogram the human mind. The CIA was very interested in his theories. Cameron developed a method he called de-patterning and psychic driving. In practice, it meant breaking a patient's mind down completely, wiping it clean, and then, he hoped, instilling new behaviors. How do you wipe a mind? His recipe was brutal. Massive doses of drugs, round-the-clock electroconvulsive shock therapy, far beyond standard therapeutic levels, sensory deprivation, and induced comas that lasted weeks on end. While patients were in drugged sleep, he'd play looped audio tapes with repetitive messages, a technique he called psychic driving, hoping to implant new thoughts in their blanked minds. The people subjected to this were not enemy agents or criminals. They were ordinary folks who went to Cameron's institute, the Allen Memorial Institute at McGill University, seeking help for issues like anxiety, postpartum depression, or minor psychiatric troubles. Instead, they descended into hell. I spoke with families of 2 of Cameron's patients, and it was hard to hold back tears hearing what their loved ones endured. One survivor, Linda MacDonald, was a 25-year-old mother of 5 young children when she suffered a bout of postpartum depression. In 1963, she admitted herself to Allen Memorial for care. What happened to Linda is almost beyond belief. She was kept in a drug-induced coma for 86 days. During that time, she was administered over 100 electroshock sessions. Some records say 102 electroshock treatments, at voltages far higher than was considered safe. Her brain was essentially fried over and over. Through it all, tapes played messages into her ears, aimed at rebuilding her personality from scratch. When they finally stopped and let Linda wake up, she was a human infant in an adult's body. She couldn't walk, couldn't feed herself, couldn't recognize her husband or children. "I had to be toilet trained again," Linda later said. "I was a vegetable. I had no identity, no memory. I had never existed in the world before, like a baby." Those are her own words. It took her months, even years, to regain basic life skills, and she never got back the memories that were erased. Decades of her life were just gone. Another case was Velma Orlikov, who was the wife of a Canadian member of Parliament. Velma went to Dr. Cameron seeking relief from postpartum depression as well. She was subjected to similar de-patterning treatments. Her family recalls that she was never the same afterwards. She suffered memory loss so severe that she couldn't remember large parts of her past, and she was plagued by anxiety and cognitive problems for the rest of her life. Imagine the betrayal. Her husband was an elected official, yet even they were not told that the treatments were part of a CIA-funded experiment in brainwashing. In Montreal, I attended a rally of families and survivors outside the old Allen Memorial Institute building. I'll never forget meeting a woman named Lana, who was holding a sign and a photo of her father. Her dad had gone to Cameron's Institute because he had a mild health issue, asthma, in fact. They promised him a cure. Instead, Lana told me, he went in there and had 54 high-voltage shock treatments followed by 54 grand mal epileptic seizures. They put him in an insulin coma and played tapes that repeated negative messages like, "Your mother hates you," on endless loop. When he finally came home, he was a broken man. "His whole life was destroyed," Lana said. "Our lives were destroyed. We went into poverty because he couldn't work. My poor mother, they took advantage of people who never consented. They were used as guinea pigs." Listening to her, I could hear a mixture of anger and sadness that spanned decades. In 1977, after MK-Ultra became public knowledge, 77 of Cameron's former patients received compensation from the Canadian government for what they endured. It was effectively hush money, without any official apology. Many others were left without recourse because they couldn't conclusively prove they were part of the experiments. Remember, a lot of records were destroyed or concealed. To this day, survivors and their families are still fighting in court for recognition and justice. Neither the U.S. government nor the Canadian government has formally apologized for these specific brainwashing experiments. The institutions involved tend to say, well, it was the past, and none of those doctors work here anymore. But for the victims, the past is present. They live with it every single day. A legacy of broken lives and secrets. By the mid-1960s, MK-Ultra was winding down. Some within the CIA had begun questioning the ethics and even the efficacy of the program. A member of the CIA Inspector General's staff discovered what was going on and insisted that non-consensual experiments be halted. MK-Ultra officially ended in 1973, right around the time of the Watergate scandal. Perhaps not coincidentally, as government abuses were under the microscope. Sidney Gottlieb, the chief architect of MK-Ultra, ordered as many records as possible destroyed to hide the evidence of what they had done. They almost got away with erasing history. But truth has a way of coming out, even if slowly. The U.S. public got its first whiff of these dark secrets in 1975, during the Church Committee hearings in the Senate and a presidential commission investigating CIA misdeeds. I've read the hearing transcripts, senators expressing absolute shock at what they were hearing. American citizens drugged without consent, prisoners and patients abused. It sounded like a horror show, and it was. But even those hearings only scratched the surface. A year later, a New York Times headline would call it a nightmare revisited as more details emerged. Over time, through Freedom of Information Act requests and dogged journalism, we learned enough to paint a broad picture of MK-Ultra's breadth. Yet so many specifics remain unknown. The government has never tracked down the victims to offer help or compensation, except in a few high-profile cases. In that sense, a lot of people were simply lost to history. Some likely ended up in mental institutions or addicted to drugs, since the CIA even experimented with addictive substances on unwitting people. Imagine waking up one day with an addiction you can't explain because someone secretly fed you morphine for weeks. Some may have taken their own lives, not realizing that their dark spiral was not a natural descent, but one engineered in a lab. Even after all my research, I still encounter dead ends and mysteries. For example, there are rumors and scattered evidence of MK-Ultra experimenting on children. In one case, a boy in a state-run care home was given LSD repeatedly, ostensibly to study how it affected those with developmental disabilities. In another, a child psychiatrist in the 1960s treated kids with LSD, ostensibly to help autistic or schizophrenic children, but with CIA funding involved. These cases are hard to verify fully, but they suggest that even children weren't off limits in this quest. That's the point where most people's minds reel. Mine certainly does. And then there are the more controversial, less proven offshoots of the MK-Ultra legacy. Over the years, a number of people have stepped forward claiming to have been part of bizarre mind control programs. Many of these stories are impossible to fully verify and live in the shadowy realm of conspiracy, but they're worth noting because they show how MK-Ultra captured the public imagination. One of the most famous such claimants was Candy Jones, a glamorous 1940s pinup model and later radio host. In the 1970s, Candy Jones claimed that she had been secretly programmed by the CIA to be a courier and possibly an assassin, given a whole alternate personality that could be triggered with code words. According to her story, she underwent hypnosis and trauma-based conditioning under MK-Ultra in the early 1960s, all without her conscious memory, which she later recovered through hypnosis with her husband. She even claimed to have an alternate persona named Arlene, who would carry out missions. It's a wild tale. Midnight training sessions at clandestine labs, missions she would go on in a trance, and so on. Jones's account, popularized in a book called The Control of Candy Jones, is controversial, and many doubt its veracity. There's no paper trail proving the CIA turned a beauty queen into a mind-controlled spy. But here's the thing. After all I've learned about MK-Ultra, I can't dismiss such stories outright. We know they tried to create hypnotized couriers and possible Manchurian candidate assassins in some sub-projects. There are documents where CIA doctors successfully hypnotized subjects and got them to do things like pick up a venomous snake or fire a gun at a colleague, unloaded thankfully, without remembering it later. So while Candy Jones's specific story remains unproven, the fact that it was even plausible in light of MK-Ultra says a lot. Then there was the case of Jimmy Shaver, a young airman at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. This one sounds like an urban legend, but it's grounded in some disturbing facts. In 1954, Shaver was accused of a heinous crime, the rape and murder of a 3-year-old girl near San Antonio. He had no prior criminal record and, critically, claimed to have no memory of the incident. Witnesses said when he was found near the victim's body, Shaver seemed dazed, like he was in a trance. Under interrogation, he couldn't recall anything until, interestingly, an Air Force psychiatrist was brought in and hypnotized him, after which Shaver gave a detailed but bizarre confession full of inconsistencies. He was executed in 1958. Decades later, researchers discovered that at the time of Shaver's trial, the Air Force had been conducting mind control experiments at Lackland, led by a Dr. Louis Jolyon Jolly West, who happened to be an MK-Ultra contractor and a specialist in hypnosis and LSD. Was Shaver one of West's unwitting test subjects who was hypnotized or drugged, leading him to commit a violent act he didn't even remember? We can't say for sure. The records, if they existed, are gone or still classified. But cases like this raise terrifying questions about how far the CIA's experiments might have gone. Could they take an ordinary person and turn them into a killer or patsy? The agency certainly wanted to know if that was possible. Whether they succeeded in any particular instance is, again, not proven, but the very possibility sends a shiver down my spine. When MK-Ultra was exposed, CIA officials defended themselves by saying the program had yielded little of actual value, that it was more or less a failure. From a coldly pragmatic view, they might consider it a failure because they didn't find a magic mind control formula or create a reliable Manchurian candidate. But there's another way to judge success: the sheer destruction of human lives. By that measure, MK-Ultra was all too successful. It succeeded in traumatizing countless people, in driving some to the brink of insanity or over the edge, in shattering families and undermining trust in authorities, all in secret. I often wonder about the moral compass of those who carried out these deeds. Did they sleep at night? Sidney Gottlieb, the poisoner-in-chief who ran MK-Ultra, carried on his work for 2 decades. He later retired to live a quiet life on a farm, reportedly practicing folk dancing and meditation, believe it or not. He rarely talked about his dark career. No one was ever truly held accountable in a court of law for what MK-Ultra did. We as a society kind of looked forward and moved on. But the victims didn't have that luxury. As I conclude this investigation, I find myself reflecting on the fragility of individual rights when confronted by government secrecy. The people in this story had virtually no chance to defend themselves. They didn't even know what to defend against. Their own minds were the battlefield, and that's what haunts me the most. The idea that your mind could be taken for a ride without you ever knowing why. We like to think of such things as science fiction or the stuff of conspiracy theory. But MK-Ultra is no theory, it's documented fact. And yes, it really did happen to real people. People like Frank Olson, who died under mysterious circumstances, like Harold Blauer, who never left that hospital, like Whitey Bulger, who carried a secret trauma along with his life of crime, like Velma Orlikow and Linda MacDonald, who lost pieces of themselves in a doctor's cruel experiment, and all the nameless men dosed in safe houses or the prisoners who went mad in a cell. These are the human faces of MK-Ultra. The black box of MK-Ultra has given up some of its secrets, but many remain locked away or lost to time. In uncovering these stories, I believe we honor the victims by not letting what happened to them be forgotten or dismissed. History, even the ugly parts, must be remembered so that it's less likely to be repeated. Thank you for listening and coming on this journey with me into the shadows of America's past. The black box doesn't lie. Neither do we. Like, comment, subscribe, help me bring forgotten stories back to light.